joined now by the Shadow Home Secretary, Nick Thomas-Symonds. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
You're asking an urgent question today of government. What is it that you want them to do?
Well, quite simply, I want them to acknowledge the chronic failures of the past 6 years to protect our democracy and our democratic discourse when it's been under attack, and also to commit to implement the recommendations that are in this cross-party report that's been produced by the very respected Intelligence and Security Committee of Parliament. It contains a range of recommendations. Firstly, in terms of government itself, I mean, it's quite remarkable, really, that over the past 6 years, there's been no single minister and no single department responsible in government for protecting the integrity of our democracy. Now, that, first of all, has to change. There are then a number of laws that the report suggests the government needs to put onto the statute book, and I'm willing to work with the government doing that, and of course need to ensure that our security services that do an excellent job get all the support that they need.
And it describes London as a laundromat in terms of money laundering. But we know that the Russian reach within the media, within sports, within all sorts of areas, within business, within property, has become absolutely integral to the fabric of our society. If you were Home Secretary, how would you deal with that? How do you unpick the issues that have already been sort of laid out here?
Well, there is a change in the report that I think is actually quite important. In terms of the dirty money, if you like, the laundromat of money, the report suggests that the unexplained wealth orders that the government introduced back in January 2018, where, the onus falls upon individuals to explain where their wealth has come from, otherwise that wealth is removed, just isn't working in the way that they expected it to be. So there's a suggestion in the report that we look at what's called the Magnitsky sanctions regime, where you can sanction particular individuals, you can prevent them profiting from our economy, you can prevent them running money through banks and so on. But at the moment, that applies to those officials who've actually abused human rights. Now, I am in favour of the Magnitsky clause, as it's known, and that law being in place. But what the report suggests is that we need to extend it, not just to human rights abusers, but to those who are involved in serious and organised crime. And that's what I would be in favour of doing and acting upon were I the Home Secretary today.
When you were on the front bench under Jeremy Corbyn, I mean, he also dropped the ball, didn't he, on this, particularly during the Salisbury poisoning incidents. You were there. Did you condemn him privately or publicly at that point when he refused to condemn Russia for what was clearly happening in Salisbury? It was a crime on British soil.
Well, firstly, I openly accept, as have we generally over recent days when we've been asked about this, that our response wasn't robust enough. In terms of what I myself did at the time, I actually spoke from the front bench in Parliament in a debate specifically on the Salisbury attack in the months afterwards. I actually quoted in that debate what the then Prime Minister had said about Russian responsibility and indicated my agreement with it. I made that clear at the time. Where we are now, though, and I recognise fully that the Labour response wasn't robust then as it should have been, but we also now need to look at the last 6 years, since 2014, which is the date identified in the report, and ask the question why it was that the government left our democracy undefended. Partly, it seems, the report says because ministers didn't want to look, but also because of this systemic failure in government where no one person was responsible for defending our democracy. That can't happen again, and that must change.
Why weren't you keener as a party to come out and condemn what was happening that the Russians were doing in Salisbury? It seems very easy now in hindsight to turn around and say because it's really apparent, but it was apparent back then what had happened.
Well, look, I mean, various people said things at that time. I mean, Keir Starmer was on Question Time in, the days and weeks after the attack, and also made clear his support for what the Prime Minister was doing.
Yeah,
but
he wasn't
I think
front bench at the time, was he? Fortunately, he's your leader now, and then you'd like to think he would have come out and been more robust. But why weren't you willing to do that?
Well, you'll have to ask individuals at the time why they didn't do that.
Why weren't you more willing to do that then?
Well, no, I did that at the time, and as I've made clear, I spoke in a debate from the front bench on it and made absolutely clear where the responsibility for the attack lay. and indeed my support for the measures the Prime Minister was taking. I mean, in terms of Keir Starmer, to say Keir Starmer isn't robust on this issue, I just don't accept. I mean, Keir Starmer is the person who represented Marina Litvinenko.
I didn't say Keir Starmer wasn't robust. I was saying that the front bench at the time weren't robust. The leader of the party and then the people sitting with him who were taking counsel with him weren't robust.
Yeah, well, that may be, and I accept that, Ben, but what I'm saying to you is you need to ask them why they took particular decisions at that time. I wasn't privy to why they took those decisions. What I'm saying is I had a particular view at the time which I actually set out in public, as did Keir Starmer, and we are being very robust now as to what our position is. We will support the government going forward in taking the measures that are required to protect our democracy, which is absolutely vital going forward.
The intelligence service also say that they have had to reduce their attention on Russia because of the threat of terrorism and the imminent threat to life that they have thwarted many plots here, as well as, of course, sadly, the ones that they haven't been able to. They've had to deal with that too. Is there some sympathy for those people who try to protect us but perhaps feel hamstrung because there just isn't enough people there to do the job that they've been asked to do?
I have great sympathy with our security services. I think they do an outstanding job, and the number of plots against this country that they foil is absolutely remarkable. But they can't do this alone. They need assistance from government. They need, as I've said, firstly, strategic leadership. Let's actually have a responsible minister, a responsible department for defending our democracy. Let's then ensure we have the laws we need. There are a number of suggestions around espionage and other things where the law needs to be changed according to that report. Let's do that. And then once we've asked our security services to do those particular things, let's make sure they've got the resources they need to.
We've got a debate happening later on in the programme because, of course, it is time for recess in Parliament and you're all going to get to go off on your summer holidays. And the question has been brought up by a number of people suggesting actually it's not appropriate for politicians to be taking a break when we're in the middle of pandemic. We've got the issues that we've got going on with Brexit at the moment and the struggle to get that deal going. And having all of our politicians going off and being with their families, as important as that may be, this just isn't the time for that to happen. What's your thoughts? What do you say to your constituents and to people at home this morning about whether politicians need to be at work or whether they are perfectly should be allowed to be having holiday?
Well, look, I think that, you know, the distinction between Parliament sitting and Parliament not sitting, clearly it's a different type of work, but I mean, I'll be working all through the summer. I'll be having in this country 3 days. I'm just going away with I have 3 young children. I'll be going away for 3 days in this country, fairly close to home during that period, but I'll be contactable, obviously, for urgent things. I think there is a distinction as well, Ben, between politicians like myself who take on a very particular responsibility on the front bench, which means that, availability around the clock is important. People have other responsibilities that, vary during the calendar year, some in Parliament, some in their constituencies. But what I would also say is that I've seen people around me right across Parliament who have been working extremely hard through this pandemic. And I imagine that almost without exception, they'll be continuing to work through the summer too.
You do get about 12 weeks worth of holiday, don't you? That's an extraordinary amount.
I didn't quite catch that question.
You do get about 12 weeks holiday, don't you, as MPs? I mean, it is an extraordinary amount.
Well, I don't think it's 12 weeks holiday. I think what you mean is Parliament isn't sitting for 12 weeks. But obviously, on days when Parliament isn't sitting, you're still doing substantial amounts of work. In my case, obviously, on my particular role as Shadow Home Secretary, but obviously enormous amounts of constituency work. And incidentally, I make absolutely no complaint about that. Very proud to represent my constituency and to be doing that work. The question, though, the second question I'd suggest is whether or not Parliament should be sitting for longer. And I do think there is a case to say that in the particular circumstance we have, that may well be the case. But that's a matter for Parliament.